The sun was sinking behind the jagged hills, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. Elias Harper wiped the sweat from his brow as he worked the cattle into the corral. Life on the ranch was hard, quiet, and lonely. He had lived alone for years, tending to his herd and keeping to himself. People in town often called him gruff, but he preferred solitude. The wide open land was his home, and he felt at peace with the wind, the earth, and the sky. As the evening grew colder, a strange sound caught Elias's attention, a hurried shuffle on the path leading to the ranch house. He frowned, setting down the lasso. Who could be out here at this hour? Visitors were rare, especially this far from town. Slowly, he approached the gate, squinting into the dim light. A young woman stood there, soaked from the sudden storm that had begun, her hair plastered to her face and her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. I need shelter, just for tonight." She looked desperate, almost as if her life depended on it. Elias studied her silently, noticing the dirt on her boots, the ragged edges of her coat, and the small bundle she carried close to her chest. There was something about her that felt both fragile and determined. "Who are you?" Elias asked, his voice low but firm. He had seen travelers and wanderers before, some harmless, some trouble. He didn't like surprises. "My name is Clara," she said, stepping closer. "Please, sir, I have nowhere else to go. The storm, it's dangerous. I can't survive out there tonight." Her eyes glistened in the fading light. Then her voice dropped almost to a whisper. If you don't let me stay, I won't be able to live." Elias's heart skipped. The words shocked him, cutting through the usual calm of his life like lightning. He didn't know what to say. He had never encountered such desperation, nor had he ever been asked such a thing. Something in her eyes told him she wasn't lying. There was fear, yes, but also honesty, a raw, pleading honesty. He hesitated, glancing at the darkening clouds and the wind whipping through the dry grass. "You'll stay," he said finally. "Inside, for tonight. But don't think you're asking for more than a roof and a fire." He opened the gate, and she hurried past, her relief visible in her quickened steps. Inside the small ranch house, the warmth from the fireplace hit her like a wave. Clara sank into a chair, her shoulders trembling. Elias watched her quietly as he set a kettle over the fire. There was a lot he didn't know about her, and he didn't ask yet. Some things, he thought, reveal themselves in time. "You should take off your wet clothes," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "You'll catch a chill." Clara nodded silently, removing her soaked coat and placing it near the fire. She seemed cautious, unsure if she was welcome, but too exhausted to resist warmth. As the rain pattered against the roof, Elias sat across from her. He lit a pipe and inhaled deeply, trying to steady his thoughts. He had seen many people pass through the outskirts of town, but never someone so bold, so urgent in their plea. Her words echoed in his mind. "If you don't marry me, I won't be able to live." Why would someone say that? Was it truth, desperation, or something else entirely? Clara stirred, pulling a thin blanket around her shoulders. "I know it sounds strange," she said softly, "but I had nowhere else. People I trusted, they wanted to control me, to force me into something I couldn't survive. I needed someone who would see me as I am, not as they want me to be." Elias studied her. Her story sounded real, but he had learned long ago not to trust words alone. Actions mattered more. And right now, her actions, standing in the storm, seeking shelter, showed courage. She was not a coward, and she was clearly willing to do whatever it took to survive. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her honesty. "You'll stay for now, but this isn't permanent. I need to know I can trust you here." Clara's eyes softened, a flicker of hope lighting her face. I understand. Thank you, sir, truly." She lowered her gaze, embarrassed by her earlier plea. Elias looked at her for a long moment, then turned his attention back to the fire. Silence settled in the room, broken only by the rain outside and the occasional crackle from the flames. Over the next few hours, they began to speak more openly. Elias learned that Clara had been living in town, working odd jobs and trying to stay out of trouble. Her family situation had been complicated and unkind. She had been running from expectations and threats she didn't want to face. The words she had spoken earlier were the culmination of her fear and desperation, an appeal for a chance at life, not simply a demand for marriage. Elias didn't interrupt. He listened, absorbing the details, noting the sincerity in her voice. It was rare to meet someone so vulnerable yet so strong. Clara, despite everything she had endured, had survived. That resilience intrigued him, even as he remained cautious. He had his routines, his cattle, and the isolation he cherished. But there was something about her presence that unsettled the loneliness he had grown used to. Night deepened, and the storm raged on. Elias made them a simple meal, and Clara helped where she could, proving that she wasn't just seeking shelter. She was willing to work, to earn her place, even temporarily. Her hands were nimble and her determination clear. He watched her quietly, feeling a mix of curiosity and something he had long forgotten: concern for another person's well-being. After the meal, they sat by the fire in companionable silence. Clara's eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and gratitude. "I'm sorry for saying what I did," she murmured, her voice small. I just didn't know how else to survive." Elias puffed on his pipe, letting the smoke curl in the dim light. "I understand," he said finally. "Sometimes people say things they don't fully mean, but your honesty, that's something rare." Hours passed, and eventually Clara's exhaustion overcame her anxiety. She drifted into sleep, curled beneath the blanket. Elias watched her, realizing that letting her stay wasn't just an act of compassion. It was a choice he hadn't expected to make. He had always lived by his own rules, protecting himself from the dangers of trust and companionship. But now, in the flickering firelight, he felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar: responsibility, care, perhaps even a faint sense of hope. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the plains glistening with fresh rain. Birds began to chirp, and the sunlight bathed the land in soft gold. Clara awoke quietly, cautious not to disturb Elias, who was already tending to the cattle outside. She wrapped herself in her coat and stepped out onto the porch, inhaling the crisp, clean air. The ranch was quiet except for the lowing of cows and the rustle of wind through the tall grass. It was a peaceful yet lonely place, a place far from the dangers she had fled. Elias noticed her watching from the porch and called her over. "We need to get started on the chores," he said simply. There was no warmth in his words, yet no harshness either. It was a statement of fact, a rhythm of life she had to learn if she was going to stay. Clara nodded, following him to the fields, eager to prove herself. She lifted hay bales, mended fences, and helped drive the cattle under his watchful eyes. Each action showed her determination and resilience. By midday, Elias began to feel a grudging respect for her. She wasn't just a damsel seeking protection, she was capable, strong, and adaptable. Yet he remained guarded. The words she had spoken the night before still lingered, the plea for marriage, for life. They had been shocking, unsettling, and somehow poignant. He didn't know if he should believe them entirely, but he couldn't ignore the sincerity in her gaze. As the sun dipped again, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Elias allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Life on the ranch was always hard, but perhaps it could also be shared. Perhaps Clara's arrival was not just a disruption but an opportunity, an unexpected challenge that might teach them both something about trust, courage, and companionship. Clara, meanwhile, sat on the porch, her legs dangling, watching the cattle move slowly across the pastures. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. The ranch, with its wide-open spaces and harsh but honest work, was a place where she could breathe, where she could exist without constant fear. And though the memory of her desperate plea lingered, she understood that survival was not just about finding shelter. It was about earning it. Day by day, moment by moment, the storm had passed, but its echoes remained in their minds. Elias and Clara had begun a delicate dance of trust and caution. Neither knew what the future held, but for the first time both felt that life on the frontier, with all its dangers and hardships, might be worth facing together, even if only temporarily. And in that fragile beginning, amid rain-soaked plains and quiet sunsets, a story of resilience, courage, and unexpected connection was quietly unfolding. The next morning, the ranch seemed calmer. The sun rose over the hills, casting golden light across the wet grass, making it shimmer like tiny jewels. Clara woke early, her mind buzzing with the chores ahead. She had grown used to the rhythm of the ranch, the sounds of cattle lowing, the smell of hay, the feel of dirt beneath her fingers, but there was still an underlying tension she could not shake. She remembered her desperate words from that first stormy night. They had been honest in their own way, but she hoped Elias did not think her weak or foolish. Elias was already outside working with the horses. He glanced up as she stepped out. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but serious. He handed her a bucket. "Start with the water for the cattle. They've been thirsty since the storm." Clara nodded and hurried to the water troughs. The cold morning air nipped at her face, but she welcomed it. Hard work kept her focused, kept her from dwelling on fears that had haunted her for weeks. As she poured water and guided the cattle, Elias watched quietly. He had noticed how she handled herself. Strong hands, steady movements, and a mind that didn't give in to fear. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and despite himself, he felt a growing curiosity. He wondered why a young woman like her would end up on his isolated ranch. The first night had been dramatic, yes, but there was more to her story than he had heard. He decided to learn it slowly, letting trust grow naturally rather than forcing answers. By midday, they were both sweaty and tired, yet the work continued. Clara had learned the way of the ranch, how to feed the horses, mend fences, and drive the cattle back to the barn. Each task brought small victories. She felt useful and capable, and Elias noticed her confidence rising with each chore completed. He allowed small hints of approval to slip. "Good work," or a nod of acknowledgement. Clara soaked up the praise quietly, grateful but careful not to appear eager. She knew trust was earned, not given. That afternoon, while fixing a fence on the far side of the ranch, Clara finally spoke of her past. "I had a family once," she began, her voice soft. "But they weren't kind. They wanted me to marry someone I couldn't love, someone cruel and controlling. I ran because I had no choice. I couldn't stay there." She looked away, staring at the rolling hills beyond the fence. "I thought if I didn't find a place to belong, I wouldn't survive. That's why I said what I said. About marriage. It wasn't just a demand, it was fear." Elias listened without interrupting. He had heard many tales of hardship, but hers carried honesty that was rare. "Survival," he said finally, "isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about choosing where to stand and who to trust." Clara's eyes met his, a flicker of gratitude there. She had come to realize that Elias, despite his quiet and sometimes gruff exterior, understood more than he let on. The days passed. Clara and Elias settled into a routine. Mornings were for chores. Afternoons were for tending the fields and checking the cattle. Evenings were quiet, spent around the fire sharing simple meals. They spoke of little things, weather, tools, livestock, but slowly Clara learned to speak more freely of her hopes and fears. Elias began to share his own stories too, of growing up on the land, of hardships faced in lonely winters, and of the small joys that came with life on the frontier. One afternoon, while checking the fences near the northern pasture, Clara stumbled upon evidence of a wildfire that had burned part of the nearby hills last year. "It's dangerous out here," she said, eyes wide. "A fire could spread so quickly." Elias nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we stay alert. Nature is beautiful, but it doesn't forgive mistakes." Clara realized that the ranch was not only a place of work, but also a place of survival. Every decision mattered. Every moment required attention. A few days later, a real test came. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon and the wind shifted sharply. Elias and Clara noticed smoke rising from a distant ridge. "Fire," Elias said tersely, grabbing a bucket and signaling Clara to follow. They worked quickly, rounding up the cattle and guiding them to safety, while Elias devised a plan to protect the barn and house. Clara moved with calm determination, following his directions without hesitation. Her fear had been replaced by focus, and her courage impressed Elias more than words ever could. By the time the fire passed, leaving scorched grass and blackened hills, they both sat down, exhausted. Clara looked at Elias, admiration and relief shining in her eyes. "We made it," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Yes, we did. But it's not just luck. It's preparation and it's working together." There was a weight to his words, and Clara realized that survival, trust, and teamwork had become the true foundation of their relationship. That night, by the fire, Clara spoke again. "I never thought I'd find a place like this. A place where someone sees me for who I am, not for what they want me to be." Elias took a deep breath, looking at the flames. "You're strong," he said. "Stronger than you think." I've lived here a long time alone, and I've learned that strength matters more than words. You've shown me that. The weeks turned into months, seasons changed, and the ranch continued to thrive under their combined effort. Clara learned quickly, becoming a skilled ranch hand, capable of handling nearly every task. She had earned her place not by pleading or begging, but by proving her courage and determination every day. Elias, in turn, found himself opening up more than he had in years. Her presence brought life to the quiet ranch, and though he would never admit it openly, he had begun to care for her deeply. Yet, despite the growing bond, both were aware of the unspoken tension. Clara's desperate plea for marriage had not been forgotten, and Elias still wondered about her feelings. Was her attachment to him genuine, or was it a result of fear and circumstance? He pondered it silently, careful not to pressure her, knowing that trust and love could not be rushed. One chilly evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Clara approached Elias. "I've been thinking," she began softly, "about everything that's happened, and about the future. I know I came here in desperation, but I also know I've found something. Someone I can rely on. You've taught me that courage isn't just fighting, it's trusting too." Elias listened, feeling a quiet warmth spread through him. Clara continued, her voice steady now. "I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to live here with purpose and with you if you'll have me. Not because I'm afraid, but because I want to. Because I trust you." Elias studied her face, seeing the honesty in her eyes. He realized that her plea from that stormy night had evolved into something deeper, something real, built on shared struggles and mutual respect. He nodded slowly, a small smile forming. "I've been thinking about that too," he said. "I don't take words lightly, and I've seen your strength, your courage. You've earned your place here, not just on this ranch, but in life, and in my respect too." Clara's eyes sparkled with relief and joy. For the first time, the fear that had driven her plea months ago melted away, replaced by hope and certainty. The following weeks were different. There was laughter in the house, quiet conversations by the fire, and a sense of partnership that neither had expected. Clara no longer needed to plead or explain herself. She had become an integral part of the ranch, and Elias had begun to imagine life with her, not just surviving together, but thriving together. One evening, as the stars filled the night sky, Elias and Clara stood outside, watching the herd graze peacefully. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of earth and life. Clara leaned slightly on Elias, feeling the comfort of trust and shared experience. The world was vast, wild, and unpredictable, but together, they felt capable of facing it. They had survived storms, fire, and fear, and in the process, they had found something neither expected: companionship, respect, and perhaps even love. Life on the ranch continued, but now it was no longer just about survival. It was about building something together day by day through work, trust, and courage. Clara had found safety, yes, but she had also found purpose and belonging. Elias had found someone who challenged him, inspired him, and reminded him that even in solitude, one could discover connection. And so, amid the wild plains, rolling hills, and endless skies of the frontier, their story unfolded, quietly, steadily, and with the promise of tomorrow. A story of survival, of trust, and of two lives intertwining against the backdrop of the untamed West, proving that even in desperation, hope and courage could bloom, and even the loneliest heart could find companionship in the most unexpected ways.